Now Inuetno. Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us to talk about the stories of Makasing and the Coyote and Crow RPG at the Museum of Native American History in Arkansas. In Indigenous communities, we have a rich tradition of storytelling, which is why it's so surprising that Coyote and Crow and the world of Makasing are among the first of their kind, an Indigenous futurist tabletop role-playing game made by a team of inspired natives. The world of Makasing imagines what the continent we now know of as North America might look like if colonization had never occurred and our cultures had been allowed to advance without outside interference. Embracing the spirit of Indigipunk, our writers and artists set out to imagine a near future in a world with a very different history. Today, I have with me some of the people who helped create this world and who are helping to expand it further. First, we have writer and playwright Coyote Old Bear. Coyote is a voting citizen of the Comanche Nation and winner of the Imagining Indigenous Futurism's Fiction Award, with half a dozen projects currently in development. Her proudest achievement is understanding the Comanche language well enough to understand her elders' jokes. Coyote, would you like to introduce yourself a little and let us know what you contributed to the world of Makasing?
Well, I did a lot of writing. I worked on the city itself, the layout of the city itself, some of the obstacles. I think the thing that really strikes people the most that came from me is the movie Motsai, the mammoths, the super intelligent mammoths is probably the thing that I'm responsible that most people would be, stick out.
Yeah, and the city specifically, the world of Makasing and the story of Coyote and Crow is centered around the ancient city of Cahokia, which was reborn in this setting to become a major trade hub within the continent of Makasing, which is now known as North America.
Yes, and the cities and the different cultures of the freelands also. Mm-hmm. The people there's just, that's the freelands, the cultures of the freelands, yeah. Those are mine.
Next, I'd like to introduce Tally Inlow. Tally is a speculative fiction writer, a member of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. Tally has spent the last several years traveling the country to serve the Indian Health Service as a healthcare worker. She is honored to have written the first Coyote and Crow tie-in novel, which is to be published later this year. Tally, please tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you've been doing on Coyote and Crow.
Perfect. Thank you for catching me on that. I like to say that I'm one of the people who gets to benefit from all of the hard work that everyone did in creating the amazing world of Coyote and Crow. I get to play in the sandbox. I get to play in the rich, beautiful, imaginative, futuristic city of Cahokia and all of Makasing. The novel, which is called Hemlock and Sage, is going to be coming out later this year. We're in the final stages of editing right now. It's very exciting. And yeah, it's amazing. I can't wait to see even more of what people do, in the tabletop role-playing realm of Coyote and Crow. And then I'm a big fan of in fiction and writing original fiction and things like that. And so the stories that could come out of Coyote and Crow are just amazing to me. So that's a little bit about what I've gotten to do in this world.
And now let me introduce M. Matson. M is a Two-Spirit lineal descendant of the Sault Ste. Marie Chippewa. They are an editor, writer, poet, auntie, geek, and friend. M, please introduce yourself and let us know about your experience working with Coyote and Crow in the world of Makasing.
Bonjour. I am responsible for editing the core rulebook, The Beast That She Is. And then I also am one of the writers of the new anthology of adventures for people to try out and see the different stories as a part of that. So I partnered with one of my good friends for the art on that, and I'm really excited for that to come out as well.
And finally, my name is Derek Pounds. I am a father, writer, and lifelong gamer. I'm something of an accidental game designer with work in Coyote and Crow, as well as the upcoming Land of a Thousand Nations for the second edition of the 7th Sea role-playing game. I will be your moderator today, and I'm looking forward to any questions that you might have for our panel. So to get us started with, all of us are writers. All of us have created stories for Coyote and Crow at this point. In what ways has your Indigenous heritage influenced your storytelling? And let's start with Coyote.
That's really easy. I think that I know that I'm really influenced by the Comanche language in and of itself, in that it's highly indirect. It's never point A to point B. It's point A, and then we go to C, and then, at least if I can blame my tendency to go off on a tangent on anything, I can blame my ancestors and my culture for my tendency to go off on 1,000 wild tangents. Also, I just think the characters, it's funny that people, a lot of readers and editors in the past would go, "Oh, you write such strong female characters, such unusual female characters." And I go, really? They're just, the people I know in my life, because Comanche women are strong people. They have strong characters and are definite forces, and they're in our communities. So I think that's another way that my background has really influenced what I'm writing. And also my desire to see Indigenous people as a whole presented as whole people, rather than cartoon characters, has been a big influence on me just wanting to be a writer. So I can say that.
Em, why don't we hear from you next?
I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this in a way that won't maybe spoil what I wrote for the anthology, because my story came out of a big question I had about the universe. How would the world interact if you interacted with the Aenimate, which is a large part of the world, the special gift that people have, in an irresponsible way? And I was able to pull from my stories and cultures that have answered questions similar to that. And I think that what this world gives is really beautiful, because you're really able to bring your stories and your culture to answer questions you have when you're interacting with the world. Like, how would my people be in this world? How would they interact with these problems and these creatures and these stories and spirits based on my stories, based on my teachings, and based on what's core and important to me. And I think that's really a gift that it allows us, that I really appreciate.
And that brings up an interesting bit of the world building in the world of Makasing, the Aenimate. It is a plant of unknown origins that can be used in ceremony to grant people extraordinary abilities. You might think of these as magical powers or even as scientific superpowers, depending on how you want to view the world. Tali, tell us about how your Native heritage has influenced your writing.
Yeah, one of the things that my dad always taught me was that if the Creator put something here to harm us, the Creator put something here to help us. And that's something that's always been really important to me through, seeing my dad go through healthcare systems and, have cancer multiple times and go to IHS clinics and all these different things. And then I have worked for IHS for a long time. And that really influenced where I took my whole life, is that philosophy of, if something can hurt us, then there's an answer out there. There's something that we can do better, even if sometimes that the answer to what can help us is something as simple as laughter or kindness, or something that's maybe not just a medicine or a, medical treatment or something like that. It can be even simpler. So one of the things that I loved about the Coyote Crow universe was that in the hospitals, for example, the hospitals in Cahokia, comedians are an integral piece of the culture. And to me, whenever I read that in the rule book, it was like a light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, of course, comedians and laughter is part of this good medicine that we bring to our people who need it. So whenever I got the opportunity to write one of the short, like one-shot stories for the anthology, Stories of the Free Land, which hopefully we can, plug a little bit later too. I wanted to take, instead of like the novel is a story focused on like, one person and her story through kind of like this, taking the Audinati and coming into like this adulthood of Cahokia and Makasing, and whether or not she's going to get this magical, almost like super ability from the Audinati and different things. The one shot, I was thinking, what is something that I didn't get to explore in the book? And it's that culture of what healthcare is in Makasing, in Cahokia. And so I also really I'm a huge fan of like horror and like general like whodunit style mysteries and things like that. So I decided to combine healthcare and a whodunit. And so my one shot is a whodunit where a bunch of comedians are disappearing from Cahokia. So that's part of that for me. What about you, Derek?
Actually, it's similar to Coyote, just giving the opportunity to really show a fully fleshed out idea of what Native American culture and society is in a setting, and not the idealized versions that sometimes tell in stories, or the demonized versions that we get in other stories, and just showing us as complex and interesting people. I come from many years of gaming, so I always look for where the conflict is. So that's where a lot of my inspiration is drawn from, seeing how different people interact, or how the way the culture might evolve with the addition of the Audinati and with the other cultural events that shaped the world of Makasing, and how that might change the way people interact with each other in our societies. I am personally from the Samish Indian Nation, and so I wrote the Pacific Northwest section, and so that's where I was coming from for that area. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, Coyote, the idea of comedians in the hospitals, that was yours, right?
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, a lot of the Cahokia stuff was me, and that was
props. I love it. I love it so much.
Well, I was like, what really makes us feel better? And, natives are really, really into comedy, really into laughing and making each other laugh. So I thought, what would logically, every time I felt bad, they would cut, I was a sickly kid, and every time I felt bad, somebody came in to make me laugh. So it made sense to me to incorporate it in that way.
Now, Em, you have kind of unique as being the first person to have taken in the whole of Coyote and Crow as a product. What were some of your biggest takeaways when going through the book for the first time like that?
It was really lovely to just see all these voices together, and to know that is what the product is made for, and what it is going to be the legacy of so many voices coming together to just collaborate and to tell stories that maybe there hasn't been spaces for. It was like watching like doors open and like a whole new space for people to play in exist, and being able to like help shape that and help try to make it as understandable for as many people as possible was a large chunk of what I was focused on. Is I want people from the gamer like you, Derek, who's been doing this for years, to someone, a kid trying to get maybe their relatives to play with them. Everyone should have the ability to feel comfortable and excited to make stories in the space. So seeing that was really, really fun.
And actually, that does bring up, I guess I should explain what a tabletop role-playing game is, since some of our audience might not know. Tabletop role-playing game is a system for collaborative storytelling. I often describe it as, imagine when you were a kid playing cops and robbers, except this time we have rules around it. We all sit around a table and imagine the same environment together and imagine the stories that the characters can be part of. Coyote and Crow, like with most role-playing games, most of the players around the table choose a specific character that they control and guide through the story. And one of the players at the table, called the story guide in our case, helps to create the world around them so they have a story to interact with. So that's what a tabletop role-playing game is. Tally also mentioned earlier, we have a book of one-shots coming out. Or actually 2 books of one-shots coming out. You can find information on them on Backer Kit, Coyote and Crow Tales of the Freelands. And just to explain, a one-shot is one of those stories the characters can interact with. It's a scenario such as a mystery of disappearing comedians that characters can find themselves in and help resolve. Okay, so all of you, unlike me, were writers before you came into the world of Coyote and Crow. This was sort of my first writing experience outside of school. How has your approach to the Indigipunk genre differed from other genres that you've worked in? Tally, why don't you start with this one?
So I really like to live in this space of fiction that we call like speculative fiction. So it's a lot of science fiction, fantasy, horror elements that don't exist but could exist. And so the idea of like taking that speculative fiction idea, genre, tropes, and then being able to take the world of Makasing and Coyote and Crow that was created really meshed incredibly well with that, because there's in speculative fiction, in any type of fiction that we write, there are all of these kernels of the world we exist in now, who we are now as people. And humanity is often the same no matter what lens you put on it or what world you set it in. So there's so much that is familiar. And that's why I really like what all of you on here have said about accessibility, about storytelling, like shared communal storytelling. Coyote and Crow and tabletop RPGs are like this opportunity for us to take these things that are familiar, this oral storytelling tradition, and put them into this really amazing, lush world. And so for me, it was a matter of most of the time remembering to kind of like set aside the, colonizer type ideas that suffuse every single day and every single aspect of everything we do, because, that's where we live and the society and culture that we live in. And it was so freeing and fun. So I would say that overall, not insanely different, but really refreshing, unique, and like energizing. Like there's nothing that I've had the chance to do with Coyote and Crow that just hasn't made me feel more like seen and part of like a really special community. And so I think that's what has been like the most special. I don't know if that like tangentially got around to answering the question, but I really like speculative fiction. I like those speculative elements and just getting to play in a world. And so the world of Coyote and Crow is just ripe for the picking for that kind of thing. It's really fun.
How about you? How has the genre of Indigipunk been different than other genres you've worked in?
Yeah. Well, a little bit in relation to the like removing your colonized perspective is like my wording, especially I had to change. I kept saying, oh, they have beef, and without thinking. And then I was like, wait, no, they don't have beef because we don't have cattle here. And so there's that. And then I also have felt very differently. Like when I write, it feels like it is my story to tell. But in this case, it wasn't just my story, it comes with the influence of Anishinaabe stories. It comes with the influence of that perspective. And although it is my view of it, these aren't, I felt more care to make sure that the way I shaped things was not just reflective of myself and not just reflective of my perspective. yeah, so you feel the weight a little bit more, I would say, in a good way, in a supportive way, but an important way.
I understand what you mean about the weight, and you also had the job of in editing, making this all cohesive and understandable. And did you approach that differently since you were approaching an Indigenous made product?
Absolutely. I was just talking to a friend about this actually, where my education comes from journalism, which is editing as much as you can, concise, you are fitting as much as you or as little as you can. So what is the shortest way you can say something? And that is just not how Indigenous people talk, at least in my experience. And I didn't want to cut out things that maybe I didn't see as important, but were very deeply important. So it took me just stepping back and making sure, like, am I cutting this? Am I editing this? Am I doing this in a way that keeps the intention and keeps the meaning of the words? So I would say I definitely didn't cut as much as I do other things because I wanted that story-like aspect of it too. When someone's telling you a story, they do say, oh, like this, similar to this. And there are stories built into it, built into the book itself. And that narrative, having it flow between one another, I think was a very interesting process to make sure felt natural.
There we go. So Coyote, back to the original question, we're talking about the Indigipunk genre, something that is new for the world of Coyote and Crow. How is your approach to that genre different than the other writing that you've done?
Well, I will say, how do I put it? For most of my career, although I've done like some non-Indigenous, like, documentary narration and just various commercial writing. Mostly I've been fighting to write speculative fiction with Indigenous characters and Indigenous themes. And for most of my career, and it has been like wading through solid rock up to your hips. And it still is much less accepted than you would think. And being in this atmosphere, working on a project where I can be as Indigenous as I am without having to go, well, how is a person from a mainstream background going to view this? And just being exactly who I am and writing exactly what I want to write, and it not being a fight, it being welcomed and embraced, has been fabulous, has been wonderful. So that's how it's been different for me. And that's been really great. It's been a really wonderful experience.
Now, that's an interesting point you made. You brought up Indigenous themes. What are some of the Indigenous themes that informed your writing when you were doing this?
Well, one of the things, economic systems. When I was writing about the freelands, when I write about people having gift economies, I definitely put that in the different peoples of the freelands. And that's something that, I have had to, anytime I've had to try to work that into anything, because my people traditionally had a gift economy, and there's still a lot of remnants of that within our culture. And although obviously, we live here with everybody else, we have to use money, but traditionally everything's been inverted, so you have more status the more you give away, is traditional for us. And even trying to get that out anywhere was so hard. And being able to just write about this and discuss this, because in mainstream society, it's often seen as kind of a dichotomy. You have to be, an unrelenting capitalist or a dirty commie. You know, it's in as opposed to you want status, you want wealth, so you can give it away. You want status, and you, like anybody, like is, you know, basic to human nature to desire the esteem of their fellows. But how you go about it is different. Because that's when writing and dealing with non-native editors and in non-native projects, this seems like the weirdest, most shocking idea that you will have to spend years, and you just go, you know, a giveaway to a bunch of natives, and they go, oh yeah, a giveaway. I got that. That's nothing, you know. So that's one thing, you know. One way that's really informed me. Also, gender. Sometimes when people talk about gender, like, oh, transgender people and non-binary people, oh, this shocking news that no, this is traditional. It was repressed. And for me, I feel like it makes me so happy to see transgendered people and non-binary people and gender fluid people, and having them in Cahokia within the book, within the entire universe there, is so, I mean, because this is the way it used to be. This is very traditional. This is very conservative for us. I mean, you know, if you look at conservative being going back to traditional roots, this is very basic Indigenous traditions. And seeing that was just uplifting to me. I mean, despite being a boring old cis person myself, it just makes my heart explode with joy. I mean, it really makes me happy. And that's another way, I would say.
Can I just piggyback off of that, Coyote, as well, is the idea of when we're talking about like telling Indigenous stories, and I'm a person who has tried for a while to like conquer the traditional publishing route and been told over and over again that like whenever I'm telling a story, and yeah, my character's like native because I'm native, but maybe they're also white passing because I'm white passing and all these different things. But that's not the native culture that people want. Or whatever story I'm telling isn't the native story that somebody wants to hear. And then trying to overcome these ideas of, well, it's only a native story worth telling if it has to do with addiction, if it has to do with the Trail of Tears, if it has to do with boarding school or, you know, general things that are considered like trauma and this historical, like generational trauma that we have experienced and is true and is real. But also being able to think of something that is like in this speculative indigipunk futuristic world where we can put aside all of the expectations that this culture, this society has on us as Indigenous people and the people who come into the world of Coyote and Crow, is that you don't have to tell whatever story it is that you've been told you have to tell. You can literally tell whatever story you want, however you want to tell it. And I think that's what is so freeing and exciting about getting to participate.
Kind of on that note, if I can piggyback off of that, is I think a lot of us are sick of the word resilient to describe Indigenous people because of the things we've gone through. But what I really like of the way that the story is told is one of the reasons colonization didn't happen was a massive climate event, right? And being able to frame resilience through that lens, not through the lens of colonization or trauma or oppression, but through how do these societies continue past something that wiped out so many people, past something that destroyed previous ways of life? What does that resilience look like in this future that we're creating. And that is one thing I have really, really liked, a theme to be able to explore in that sense.
Absolutely. And certainly for me, one of the things I've drawn on as far as just Native stories, like I have always been a collector of stories. I love stories. I read a lot of books of storytelling and things like that. And one of the things I love about many of our Native American traditions of storytelling is that they're not Aesop's fables. They don't have a moral precisely. They don't tell you what you should think about the story. They let you draw your own conclusions. And like, especially up here in the Pacific Northwest, many of our heroes, for lack of a better term, in our stories are liars and tricksters and things like that. And so, I enjoyed coming into this and writing stories where, I don't know, they might seem from a Western perspective to be morally ambiguous, but, really they're stories about people using the skills they have for the greatest benefit of their people and whatever that may be. Thank you. That was a great conversation. So one of the challenges of writing a role-playing game, and Coyote, you face this as well, is writing a world that still has space for other people to tell their stories in. Is there a way that you approach this storytelling differently than your other work to fit within that role-playing game narrative?
Oh, this may sound okay. I wrote it oftentimes imagining fan fiction as I was writing it. If someone was going to write Coyote Crow fan fiction, and I have all kinds of, I have my own, how do I put this? I imagined stories as I was devising things, and things that could happen between different cultures, between different individuals, between different, people doing different jobs, people with different skill sets. I imagined it as I was writing it. There are lots of untold stories swimming around. It has to do with my hair stand up. No, and my hair turning white. And anyway, so yes, and there are things lots of things, which as huge as the book is, because the book is big. One of the things that is probably notable are the things that I didn't write down, that I thought of and didn't write, for me, my parts, the things I imagined and didn't write, and kind of left a space for, if that makes any sense, for the players.
Absolutely. Yeah, my approach was, whenever I was writing something, I would try and get it to a conflict point, a point where it was like a dramatic choice that was going to have to be made soon. And I just left as many of those in as I could, so that people who were coming into this game and coming into this world and telling these stories would have those conflict points with which to draw on to make their stories more exciting and more meaningful to the setting around them. Now, this is kind of the other side of that. Tali, you are the first person to have the experience coming into this world already created and being asked to create your own story in it. So what was that experience like, writing in a pre-existing world?
It was so easy and wonderful because I come from fan fiction, as so many of us who are writers, like, we cut our teeth writing fan fiction because it is so like fun and creatively satisfying to jump into a world and fix the things that went wrong or imagine them in new settings. So what I got to do in the sense of writing a Coyote and Crow novel is I did, I guess it's almost like the reverse of fan fiction. I used the world, and then I created these characters who I wanted to see me, and I wanted to see how almost like imagining what like a young woman on the cusp of adulthood like what challenges she would face, not just in like deciding which path animal she is going to choose whenever she goes through her Aenimate ceremony, but also what are her obligations to her family? What is her course of study? What is she, what choices is she going to make in this world? So jumping into somebody else's pool of amazing ideas and jumping off points and these points of conflict. I won't give away, too much about the novel, watch future spaces for that, but like jumping off of those points of conflict, because there are, even with the Aenimate itself, it's this tool that has been harnessed by this advanced society and allowed them to advance even further. But what things can go wrong there? What are the things that could be misused or abused? It is not a utopian society. There are people on the outskirts. There are abuses of power. There are, politics and machinations of people in different, sects of society and things like that. So there's just so much to play in there. It was a joy. And I hope that everybody who comes and gets to do, whether you do a one shot, whether you do, a weekly campaign for 2 years, whatever it is that you do in Coyote and Crow, like you have so much opportunity to just tell stories. And so it was really fun for me.
Now you brought up that the fact that the world is not utopian. And I know, there has been so many negative depictions of us. There's a temptation to make things better, to make things more utopian, to say the society we created would have just been in every way better than the society we're living in now. Did any of you, like me, kind of struggle with that and have to push against it and, seek out and find those points of conflict, those unique troubles that our culture might have that another wouldn't? How about you first, Em?
For sure. Yeah. Especially as the editor, right? Because I'm trying to keep the voice true. And I'm trying not to input my own ideas on things, which was especially hard because in the book, the Anishinaabe are considered second-class citizens, and being like, those are my people, was a little hard. And but being able to see from it as like, these are just opportunities, these are opportunities to tell stories. Like we had just said, they leave spaces open for people to interpret, I think was a large part of what helped me like push through that.
How about you, Tali? Like what were some of the things you thought of to kind of push yourself away from some utopian vision?
I think I just came back to like some general like storytelling principles and of like creating conflict and creating like one character twisting clockwise while another one is twisting counterclockwise creates just a really fun, engaging story to tell. And so it was a unique challenge because my perception coming to the Coyote and Crow world is how beautiful and perfect and wonderful things seem, and then digging deeper, which is why it was awesome. Like the core rule book that everyone, and that's the other thing too, is like, I'm not a tabletop RPG player. Like I love watching, people role playing and all kinds of stuff. And the stories that come of that is wonderful, but the actual game mechanics are not my strong suit. So actually reading this rule book though, is like reading this, I don't even know. It's like just all this fodder for possible storytelling mechanisms. So it was challenging in on one hand in that I want to do things justice, but on the other side of things, there's so much rich like opportunity for storytelling and for conflict, and to really take it in whatever direction you see fit as a player, a writer, a story guide, whatever the case may be. There's just so much opportunity there. So if people haven't had a chance to check out the core rulebook, please do, because even if you're not a gamer, there's so much in there that is just joyful to read, intriguing, and even for those of us who aren't role players, it almost made me want to just like jump into that storytelling mode of like creating adventures and things like that for people because it's so rich. So yeah, I think there's just endless opportunity.
And Coyote, did you have any struggles, pushing away from those utopian ideals? Knowing some of your stories, I'm guessing it was probably easier for you.
Yeah, I'm not the most utopian. I also, although, for me, a lot of it was in my mind. I think of the 12 and I think of the Comanche Business Committee. I think of the all the tribal chairman troubles that we've had. Because I come from a family that's very involved in tribal politics, I think the utopian thing just zoomed right past me, because I know how we can be, and also coming up with the balancers, and then thinking about the alone, and thinking about all the different groups, and thinking about the Bequi and that's the slur their neighbors call them, the water people, and all the different nations, and the conflicts that they get into, because I look at real Indian country and what really happens. So I guess the siren song of utopia did not, I was immune to that. Although what's funny is I've seen people who haven't read the book go, oh, well, it's just utopian. You're just imagining, I'm like, no, you clearly haven't read the book. You clearly haven't looked at all the conflicts that do exist, not just between nations, but within nations. Like in the real world, like anywhere there are two Homo sapiens, there are two opinions about how things should be done. And, we can be so Machiavellian, we can have such, you will never see machinations like you will see within a tribal government, within families in a tribal government, and within. So I guess I never ever thought, oh, this is in danger of being too utopian. I'm like, no, there are going to be, everybody's jockeying for position, even, if it's to have, an iota more clout, social clout than somebody else. They're just all going to be jockeying for position. So that was.
I feel like it's almost like we see this world where there's so much, first of all, representation, but also hope and promise and potential, that we then automatically almost equate that to a utopia, and it's not. It's just exciting and like exhilarating, but people see this like beautiful artwork and this futuristic, the indigipunk style, and they're like, oh, that could only happen in like some like place where it's perfect and there's no conflict whatsoever. And it's like, conflict drives us as a society. And anyway, yeah. So there's a difference between something being really hopeful and promising and being a utopia.
Yeah, and just as a consumer of Indigenous media, like reading something that is hopeful and optimistic, it's so rare to come by that I love the setting for that. Like there is conflict, there is challenge, it's not utopian, but ultimately it is a hopeful setting, one that puts us at the brink of great potential, I think. I did want to say, we know there are some people watching along with us. If you have any questions for us, please ask. We would love to hear them and address those for you. And I guess just to kind of keep talking until that happens, There's a lot of Indigenous folk out there, young and old, who want to break into the world of storytelling and writing. Just each of you, from your experience, what advice would you give to those people? Let's start with them again this time.
I would say do a lot of listening and reading. Know what kind of work you love, know what kind of stories inspire you, and then kind of tell stories that you would be proud to have next to those. I just think a lot of my best work comes from after long periods of exposing myself to other people's stories, and exposing myself to just different styles of writing and different types of stories and different subject matters and fiction and nonfiction. The more I consume, the more I find it easy to draw from. So yeah, find people and artists who inspire you.
Molly, how about you? Or I'm sorry, Tali, how about you? What advice do you have for up and coming writers and storytellers?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as I heard you ask that question, I thought about when my family gets together for like holidays and big meals and stuff like that. And no matter if we hadn't seen each other in a big group setting for 3 years because of, COVID-19, or if it's around Christmas time and we just saw each other at Thanksgiving, what are the stories that your crazy, uncles and aunts are going to tell, even though you literally just heard them like 6 weeks ago, because they're such good stories. Think about the stories that you've heard your whole life told over and over again. See how they change, see how they stay the same. What's at the heart of those stories? What are the stories you like to tell? If you don't have people around you like sharing their stories, what are the stories that you tell yourself over and over? What are the stories that you create in your mind? And, don't be afraid. There's no wrong answer. Like, just give yourself permission to like be free and try different things. So think about the stories you've always heard. Think about, what you love to consume and go from there. Go write some fan fiction, go pick up Coyote and Crow and make up a story set in the Freelands or set in Cahokia or, set in the outskirts of some, small area that's as of yet uninhabited. What happens there? Make up anything, because that's what storytelling is just telling the first person who reads whatever story, that's you. And so tell yourself a story, put it down and see what happens. You never know.
Coyote, do you have any advice to offer?
Several pieces. One is write every day. That's probably the thing that I would say works better than anything to improve. You get better by doing it. So write every single day. Don't let yourself take a break. I still do it. I started when I was 7. I still write every day. I would also say, don't give up. Like I said, I was writing until probably about 10 years ago. Was it 10 years ago? A little less than 10 years ago. I was only doing commercial work. I was only doing screenplays for, documentaries and just, commercial writing and selling the odd poem here and there because nobody wanted Indigenous anything. And it's only been in the last 10 years I started selling, but I just kept doing it. I just didn't stop. I kept writing and I kept sending it away. And just don't, you think that you're utterly defeated and nobody wants what I'm doing, and just don't stop. That's all I can say. If you don't, and you'll get better. Everything you write will be better than the thing you wrote before it. And if you go, oh, it's terrible. Well, let that be a lesson and go to the next thing. Write it again. Don't make a different mistake. Don't make the same mistake. You make a different mistake. Or go, oh, I know what I should have done. And you can edit it. Edit. Take editing seriously. That's another really key part of really learning the writing craft. Don't think, oh, I wrote it once, now I'm done. No, if you want it to be great, you may have to write it 30 times. You may have to, go over it with a fine-tooth comb and then put it back somewhat the way it was before. You're never really done. And that's part of how learning craft works, is really learning to edit yourself. We can't turn it all over to M. She doesn't want all of it. She doesn't want to edit it 40 times. By that time, if she's edited it 40 times, she wrote it. So a big part of editing is writing, or writing is editing.
I think we have a question from our audience. Let's hear that.
All right. My question is, how can a storyteller or a writer who may not have or come from an Indigenous or Native American background maybe want to include a character from that kind of background into their story without, making it seem phony or offensive? What are some ways for a storyteller or writer to do that appropriately?
Well, I guess this kind of ties into our conversation about utopian stories and things like that. But the first thing is to remember that we're real people, making the native character, the just one who knows all about the mystic world and is perfect at everything, is just as untrue as, making them nothing but an alcoholic. Coyote, do you have any input on this?
I would say you need to talk to Native people, but also they can't be a generic Native American. They need to belong to a specific tribe. They might have little oddities that you know nothing about. So you need to make sure to talk to an actual member of that nation. OWLs, I would not have anyone like a Comanche character, wouldn't have them anywhere near. I get the heebie-jeebies. So, it's a lot. There are a lot of different things like that. So you would have to have a specific nation and talk to a member of that nation who is culturally connected, is one thing that I would say would absolutely be necessary to make it right, to make the story right. And heavy metal. We love heavy metal as a group. Modern Indigenous people love heavy metal. It's a real thing.
It's true.
There is a service that you can get. It's called sensitivity reading. It's a type of editing. And that's another thing you might want to consider for your story. Just once it's done, having someone from the culture the character is from, just go over it once and take their advice if they suggest any changes.
In the context of Coyote and Crow, what's really nice about the way it's been set up is it's built for people who are Indigenous and who are not Indigenous. And there are tips on how to play the game, playing a character who is Indigenous to Makasing and the Americas, but who is authentic and natural to the world and not to what people's assumptions of what indigeneity is. So I offer to people who are not Indigenous, who may be nervous to tell stories within this world, that it is built for you to tell stories in, and there are tips for you on how to do that throughout the entire piece.
So I want to thank everybody for coming and listening to our talk. You can find more information about Coyote and Crow at coyoteandcrow.net. Like I said, we currently have a crowdfunding campaign happening on BackerKit. It's doing very well right now, and we would love you to take a look at it and see if you might be able to support us in our new books coming out. Additionally, for those people who want to tell stories in Makasing, who want to try their hand at writing, pretty soon we're going to be opening up a community content store on the website Drive Through RPG, where you can write fan fiction and post it for sale or as pay what you want or for free, just to get input from other people in the fan base out there. Does anybody else have any final words they want to say?
I just want to say to that last question too, like, be respectful above all, ask questions, just dive in and don't be afraid, but be part of the community. We've always been welcoming and will continue to be, and just have fun.
All right. Thank you very much. This has been a conversation about Coyote and Crow and the world of Makasing for the Museum of Native American History. Have a wonderful day, everyone.